Welcome to the Space Marketing Podcast, where we look at marketing principles, strategies, and tactics through the lens of space. Hi, I am your host, Izzy House. Today, we chat with Krystal Azelton, Senior Director of Program Planning at Secure World Foundation, about sharing the message to ensure that space is secure, sustainable, and peaceful for the future generations, as well as our planet. So lift off in 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Space Marketing Podcast. Information relating to our discussion today and links to the video version can be found in the episode show notes on spacemarketingpodcast.com. Please like and subscribe to the podcast. It will help more people reach beyond the atmosphere. Information in this episode is for entertainment and information only. Please consult a professional for your specific situation. A few weeks ago, I was at the SmallSat conference in Logan, Utah, and it was really a great conference. It was my first time there, and it was so much fun. I was invited to speak on a panel by our next guest. She is a passionate voice about getting the space message out into the public. She works tirelessly as she is driven to ensure that space is secure, it is sustainable, and it is peaceful for our future generations and our planet. Krystal Azelton, Senior Director of Program Planning at Secure World Foundation, travels all around the world to spread this message about how important space is in our daily lives. So welcome, Krystal. How are you doing today?
Great, Izzy. I'm so excited to be with you here on this podcast. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it is a delight to have you, and thank you for doing what you do. It is so needed. It's why I am here with my podcast, is because this message needs to be told, and space needs to be told. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's talk about how you personally became interested in space. What's your journey, and how did you discover the space industry?
Yeah, thank you for that. So yeah, like many people, I didn't necessarily follow a traditional career path into the space industry. I was a bit of a space geek as a kid. I went to space camp and I collected collectibles and I was really excited about it. But when I was 17 years old, I was just smart enough to realize I probably wasn't going to get to be an astronaut, and I didn't really want to be a scientist or an engineer. Like, I really liked space as an idea. I loved the idea of colonies on Mars. I found the whole thing very exciting, but I couldn't see a place for myself in the industry where my strengths were more in English and social studies and all these other areas. I liked reading about science, but I didn't necessarily want to be the scientist. And so I followed another passion of mine, which is politics and international affairs. And I went to Georgetown and studied those things. And I did development work around the world for a number of years and really loved it, but eventually kind of came to the conclusion that I didn't necessarily want to make that my long-term career. And by then, I knew enough people in Washington to realize, like, there's whole parts of the space industry. There's whole professions that, aren't necessarily technical, but that can contribute to this really great industry. And so I did a big career switch when I was in my mid-20s and talked my way into a job working on a contract at NASA headquarters, where I got to do what I think of as like interagency communications between all the different branches. So really helping the scientists report out and vice versa. And over time, that's, turned into the career I have now. But so for me, it was really about kind of combining all the things I was passionate about. And it's only kind of gotten better too, because a lot of the work that I originally did in development, trying to help communities around the world, as more time has passed, those communities and those projects work with space even more. So now part of what we're going to talk about today is like the benefit that space has and how we communicate that and how we encourage the adoption of space. And that's what I started with. I talk a lot about being a young professional on the ground who kind of vaguely knew that space might be helpful in space data, but not really sure how to use it, to someone who now works on that. And so it's been kind of a different journey, but one that I think is really applicable in the space industry. Again, we talk a lot about STEM. We talk a lot about the hard sciences, which are super important, and we always want to encourage people to go into those. But for the space industry to thrive and to grow, we need marketing people and comms people and politicians and lobbyists and, people that, do all kinds of different jobs. And so it's kind of neat to be able to speak to that a little bit too from a personal angle.
Well, your title is program planning. So what is it that you do with program planning at Secure World?
Yeah, absolutely. So I couldn't be happier where I landed in the end. I feel quite privileged. I am with the Secure World Foundation, which we can talk a little bit about, which is a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. and Colorado. And our mission is entirely space sustainability, which these days is a fairly hot topic. So I'll assume the readers or the listeners have a decent understanding of that. But 10, 15 years ago, that wasn't really the case. And we really work to promote space sustainability solutions all around the world. So as you can imagine, we have a number of key areas, things like debris and space situational awareness are really important to us. But so are things like commercial best practice and space law and even security and the role that it plays in geopolitics regarding space sustainability. So we work on all of these things. And actually my previous role at Secure World, which I still do quite a lot of and is a bit more relevant to this conversation, is I was the director of human and environmental security and space applications. And so really trying to understand the policies and best practices around how we actually use space and space data and communicating that to the world. My current role is a little different. One of my colleagues left a few months ago and I've taken on some of his duties. Some of you may know him, Brian Whedon. And what I do now is really help the organization think strategically as well. So I kind of do my projects on one side. I run things like what we call the Summit for Space Sustainability. But then I also really help us with our strategic thinking, our budgeting, our program planning. We are a nonprofit with an endowment. So every year we go through a budget planning process to decide, what projects are we going to respond to? What are we going to do this year? And it changes. The space environment changes every year. What becomes really important? It's not a month to month kind of thing. But we really try to be adaptive to where the trends are and what all of the other actors in the system are, because we're there to be a supporter, a convener, someone who's doing research and holding events to talk about these important issues and help other people come to the solutions. So we're kind of unique in that way. We're not a classic think tank. We don't just do research. We really are out there trying to push for solutions and help others to get to know each other so that all of the different parts of the space community can recognize, which I think is pretty common these days, but also make progress towards space sustainability solutions. Because if we don't do that, obviously then the benefits from space at some point in the future could decrease. And that is really what our organization is trying to avoid.
Well, and I'd like to really point out that even though you're not a marketing professional, marketing is a huge part of what you do. I mean, you are the megaphone that is something that you're getting the word out there. You're on social media, you're on panels, you are spreading the message, but you're not in marketing. And my point to everybody is that we're all in marketing. Number one. Number one, we are all in it. So if you want to talk about how did you become the megaphone? I mean, this is not something that you just wake up one day saying, I want to be, the poster child for this particular cause. So how did you get there?
Yes, I'll talk about two things. One, a little bit the organization and why we feel these issues are so important. And then a little bit myself and how I actually got really interested in marketing. You and I connected over this event that I put together at SmallSat, which is one of my favorite conferences. Highly recommend it to everyone. But also like other events around the world. Like I actually feel really strongly that what you just said is true, that we're all marketers in space. And I think in some ways we need to do a better job of it. And so Secure World as an organization is very much, as you said, kind of a mouthpiece for this issue. We're not necessarily saying, well, this is the only solution to space sustainability because we're just one player. But because of our early mission early on, we realized that the understanding of this topic and how people were going to approach it was going to vary, right? You have global approaches, you have national approaches, you have how commercial industry has really grown. And so a big part of what our message is that everybody has to care about this. Everybody has to work on these topics. Everybody needs to be thinking about this, that we can't just go about our business of running businesses and, doing government projects, et cetera. So our organization works really hard to do that. And, that just because you said it involves getting out there. It involves doing studies and doing research and making sure people understand the importance of these issues and where they're going to go and what that might look like in the future. So as an organization, we really spent a lot of time on that. But we also we're learning to do our own comms. Something I say to space companies is, how is your marketing? How is your BD? We often focus on the science and the technology and where we are, and we forget about kind of the softer pieces of making this all work. And my organization was no different. We hired our first comms director recently, actually, within the last 2 years. And so, we as an organization too need to think more about this. And then I've gotten really passionate about space marketing a couple of years ago. I was really observing kind of two parallel trends, and I kind of started incorporating them into my work at Secure World Foundation. So the first was that there is obviously a huge focus on commercial launch, and particularly on sort of the non-scientific part of launch. So, whether you call it space tourism or whatever you want to call it, there's a lot of public consciousness around that. And a lot of the news coverage that I was seeing was not terribly good. And a lot of it was driven by us, though not all of it. Some of it is something that just the storylines that the commercial, regular media is going to pick up. But I also saw kind of a lack of focus on why we want to do this. Like, why is it important to look at exploration? Why do satellites matter? And so I kind of had that observation. And at the same time, I also have teenage stepkids. And so I'm online a lot looking at social media. And a lot of coverage that I saw in the space community there was also fairly dismissive. And so one of my big concerns grew to be is that I think in the space community, we're all really passionate about what we do. It's so cool. It's so fun. A lot of us, like me, did this from when we were kids. And I don't know that the public consciousness is quite there with us. And I suppose I'm mostly talking about the West, but not entirely. And I think that, there's always been critics of space. Is this worth spending money on? Why are we investing in this? Why does this matter? That's not new. But the voices are getting a little louder. One year in one Super Bowl, there were multiple commercials that touched on space as frivolous. Why are we wasting money on space? And that just surprised me. I was like, this is Super Bowl. Why is this a message? Patagonia came out with this huge ad all around the world that was all about, we're about the Earth, not Mars. And like, that is just not how I want the space community to be viewed by others. And the only people that can really fix that is us.
I would like to touch on that a little bit. Is that, okay, if Patagonia wants to go in that direction about caring more about the planet, they don't have to go very far before they trip over space. If we want to better our planet and we want to fix our climate, where do we go? We go to space to do that. And so that particular campaign, I personally don't get, because you need space to do what it is that they were talking about doing. So, I just wanted to throw that in there, that I realized myself, which is why I'm here, is because I saw space not doing a very good job of getting that message out. I mean, we carry space in our pocket with our phones. Everything about this thing is space, and yet most people have a disconnect. So, yes, please continue.
Well, that's exactly how I felt. So I started looking at this, and from my side of it, someone who works on the space policy, it's like, you're not going to get better space policy if we don't start from a fundamentally basic place of why space is important. And so I started doing some events and looking at this back in 2022, trying to get the space community to think about some of these things, and for me to get a better understanding. And then slowly I got to know folks like you, who are really kind of the bread and butter people working on this issue. And I think that message of really trying to focus on the communities and how we are showcasing value. And look, it's not that every single person everywhere needs to understand exactly how space is a part of their daily lives. But at the same time, I feel like we sometimes talk in an echo chamber. And if we don't do a better job of getting that value out there, we're going to see a decrease in investments. We're going to see pushback from the public, because they do assume this is a boondoggle, or it's just a bunch of rich people, or all these things, none of which are really true. But it's easy to see that. Or, I see a lot of misinformation online. Rockets are terrible for the environment. Okay, we're looking into that. But also, some rockets don't even, some rockets burn hydrogen.
Yeah, there's one rocket that uses plastic bottles. It's actually a green rocket. So we're looking at using cow dung and methane and things that are considered to be, where we're using green technologies. And once we figure that out with rockets, then guess what? It comes back down here. It comes back into our energy supply, and we use it for other things. So all that comes back down, even with rockets.
Well, exactly. And so I've just gotten really passionate about trying to incorporate into our messaging, into our work where I can, this idea of the space community itself, whether you're a business, whether you're an academic, whether you're in government, et cetera, that we really can't dismiss the need for communication. So for me, it's not always just marketing. Sometimes it can be that broader communications category, but the same message applies, is that if you are thinking about your audience, if you're thinking about what they need to understand, you will sell more. You will be able to get more resources. You'll be able to do all the things that we want to do. But a core part of that is being able to communicate about why it matters and what we do with it. Because as you said, the reality is there. This is, you don't have to go very far to find that benefit. But you do have to focus on communicating it and helping people understand it in terms that is approachable to them, as opposed to very scientific or very technical, or assuming that we're only talking directly to our sellers. I think that's a mistake that we often make in the space industry, is that if you go, you look at websites, how are they structured? Who are they communicating to? That sort of thing. And so, yeah, I've become really passionate about trying to incorporate some of these messages into my work around space sustainability, which I do think is a strong message. But, I'll also admit an ulterior motive. In my case, I want people to understand the value of space because I also want to make sure that we continue getting that value, which means thinking about space sustainability and space environmentalism and making sure that we're taking the correct steps to have access for the long term. And then as we expand, beyond the near Earth environment, are we thinking about all the sustainability issues in those environments as well? And so those are big topics, but it's exciting for me, and they're all kind of part and parcel. You can't break them out. If we're going to have conversations about the future, we have to be thinking about how people understand our industry now. I mean, the truth of the matter is it's very easy to overlook space, but we shouldn't be. And so, yeah, that's become a big part of what we do at Secure World.
Well, one of the concerns that I have is that it does matter on politics. It does matter in how things happen. Like, for example, NASA budget is being cut severely. And this has really large ramifications because, say the Artemis program gets pushed to the point to where China puts the first person on the moon before us. That has geopolitical ramifications. And if the public doesn't think space is important, then they're not going to make it to where it's part of the a larger budget. They're not going to make sure it's in schools. A lot of schools have taken science out of pretty critical ages. And, that's something that is really important with this message. It's how we inspire the future workforce. Do we want them to just flip burgers, or do we want them to reach for stars? So it's a choice that we're making with our dollars and with our message.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on the budgetary and resource question and on the workforce question. So, when it comes to the US budget, I'll be honest with you. I think we're almost maybe a little over reliant on that classic China as the threat situation. I think that's driving a lot of Space Force budgets. I think we're trying to use that to drive NASA budgets. And I personally think it's a bit of a mistake. Of course, I have national security concerns there, but I also think that we need to focus on the real reasons, like the really core reasons of what you just said as to why we need to fund these things. We need to fund this for future innovation. We need to fund this for STEM reasons. We need to fund space and space activities, whether they're exploration, whether they're satellites, whether they're exploratory programs trying to figure out really interesting things, because that is the future of our world. We're already dependent on these technologies. We need to remain competitive globally, but also from an internal perspective. And so I absolutely worry that budgets are being cut, things are being reallocated. What we prioritize is becoming more political. Space was often kind of viewed as a very bipartisan issue, and I think there's still a lot of truth in that comparatively to other topics, but it's not 100%. And I do think we've slowed down our funding for space. Again, I work on the regulatory and policy side. So in addition to NASA budgets, I also worry about like the Office of Space Commerce and the FAA and all of these other agencies that do really critical space infrastructure stuff. They work on the regulations, they do the licensing, they help commercial industry grow, et cetera. And those places are also stymied by, off and on a lack of budget or a lack of clarity. We've been debating a lot of policy and regulation in the United States for years now, and it's all great. And we've slowly made progress progress among multiple, across multiple administrations, but we need to keep working on that. And, we are a global leader on these things, if only by the size and number of the satellites that we have. And so I really want my nation to lean in and be a leader on the scientific front, on the policy front, et cetera, and really showcase what it is to be a space nation and what that means and the value that comes from that. And on the workforce, I could not agree with you more. I'm very concerned on this front. And I think part of the answer is better marketing. And what I mean by that is, the young generation coming in is very aware of the problems in the world. They are very concerned. They're very socially active. They want to have careers that fit their lifestyle, but also that have a purpose. And so if we focus only on the technical and we focus only on that kind of thing, I think we lose a decent portion of young people who, as you said, are we even training them and teaching them from an early age? But then beyond that, are we showcasing them that you can go be in this industry and you can work on climate change? If you're passionate about disasters, if you're passionate about any of these things, space is a part of that solution, a really big part of that solution. And I think we're missing that link sometimes. And that to me is a huge lost selling point to young people, who are growing up in this world, who are very concerned about all these things. And so why would we not make that case? Why would we not present, hey, look at our amazingly cool industry. Oh, and by the way, you get to help the world. And I think that is something that we should be doing a lot more. I think right now we focus a lot on, oh, look, astronauts. Aren't astronauts cool? And look, I like an astronaut as much as the next person. But I don't think that that's the selling point to the next generation, at least not here, that it used to be. I think we have to focus on purpose and value and the benefit of space way more than we used to. People don't just assume it's neat. We have to show them that.
Hold on to your boosters. We will be right back with guest Krystal Azelton, Senior Director of Program Planning for Secure World Foundation, after the briefest message from our sponsors. Please like and subscribe to the Space Marketing Podcast so you don't miss a thing. Well, and there's also another problem that's happening with our youth today is that they don't have something to work for as a group, as, something that's bigger than themselves and something that, makes them feel like they belong to something greater and better. And it is so important that we inspire them and make them feel like a part, because suicide is up, drug use is up. There's all these things that compete for our children's lives. And space is one of those things that can give them inspiration. It can change how they go to school. And this is why I am here, is because I have seen it work. I have seen that 14-year-old that was transformed and is successful because of something like space. I mean, space for me is a vehicle for inspiration for our generation. And so that's why it's important.
Well, and it's interactive learning. It's the opportunity. Yes. I mean, that's some of the beauty. We've made space. It has become more approachable, right? There are more opportunities for young people to get involved, to get hands-on, to understand whatever their passion is. I mean, one of the other things that we've touched on briefly, but that I always like to point out, is that the opportunity for space to affect pretty much any industry you want, any topic you want in the world, is very real, whether it already is or there's the potential. Like, the potential is fairly endless. You're passionate about animals. There's ways that it affects that. If you're passionate about elections and politics, there's ways that space is used in those circumstances to produce better results. And that's that tangible, hands-on learning that is so applicable. And then when you show someone that, hey, this science is part of you, whatever you're interested in, you can be interested in urban housing development, and space is a tool that is used in that field. And if it isn't, it can be. So I think that that's a lost opportunity to showcase, how key science is to all parts of life. It's a much more hands-on, application of space is applicable. You can talk about whether biology is, of course it is, but it's so much easier to show someone, hey, look at this link and look at what we use the data for and look where the data comes from and look what you can do with it. You yourself have access to some of this, that kind of thing. And that can be not just inspiring, but it's also something where it becomes yours. Like you can already do things with it right away. And that's really exciting to me.
And if you have somebody in your family that's suffering from something like osteoporosis or Parkinson's, or, there's things that are going on right now in space that are making those things better. Diabetics, the strips that test our blood sugar came from testing astronauts up on the ISS. There's so many things like that. One of the companies that I have locally in Kentucky that is a Space Tango, they are building artificial retinas to be able to give people with macular degeneration eyesight. How is that going to impact this world when you can give somebody eyesight? So there's so many things, from marketing to planning to, what if you just like the finance part or any kind of career that you want to do? There's probably a space career that's pretty comparable.
Yeah. Well, and we need those people. It goes both ways. Like I want to inspire that generation, but when we're talking about workforce issues, I also want those people to come looking for jobs in our industry. Our industry can't exist and do well without accountants and all of these other careers. And sure, somebody might just stumble into one of these jobs and that's fine. But actually to showcase like the complexity of the world, to say that you can go do this one thing and then you have your pick of what industry you support. And if you want to support an industry that's really relevant and really important, this might be the one for you. If you don't want to go do science, you don't have to, but you can work at an organization and do their accounting and know that the work that you're supporting is, as you said, changing lives around the world. And I think that's a really powerful message. Plus, it benefits us too, because people need to know that, we're open for business and that we need all of these people. Workforce doesn't just mean STEM. It means all the workforce that you need to support your industry and your community.
And one of the things that I talk about is like marketing itself is like a big diamond and there's different facets. When people think of marketing, they think of the sales part, which is important. It's the human touch to marketing is the sales part, but marketing is also education. When you're talking to that 14-year-old and you're, talking about different careers, you're marketing to that 14-year-old and they're choosing an identity based off of what the message is that you're giving out. So education is my favorite because it makes people better. And you're very focused on education. So you want to talk about how you personally got to be the megaphone and what does success look like for that particular endeavor for you?
It's such an interesting question. So because I work in a space sustainability field, one of the big things for me is we've kind of shifted our goals in the last few years. So when my organization started and even when I came on, which has been quite a while now, one of our biggest focuses was awareness raising, get people to care about this topic, get people in the space community to talk about space sustainability, talk about the different challenges. And that's still something that we do, right? I think a lot of people hear space sustainability and they only think of debris. And that is not, that's only a part of the question. We talk about spectrum and we talk about space weather and we talk about all these other things that contribute to space sustainability. And they're just as important, sometimes more important. But at the same time, I would say that has generally been fairly successful. So between us and many other organizations working on this topic, you can't go to a space conference these days and not hear about space sustainability, which is great. But talking about it isn't the same thing as doing something about it.
Right.
And so that's a big part of what we try to use our megaphone for is what can we do? How can we do it better? How can we encourage others in the space community to take their part in making and finding these solutions and to recognizing there is an urgency here. Space is a place where you can the technology can get out in front of the issue, just like any other field. Why do we have some of the problems we have on Earth? Because technology and human action and all these things got in front and got out in front of what was necessarily the best way forward. And it's a balancing act, right? My organization absolutely supports commercial development of space. My organization absolutely wants governments to continue all of the different types of missions that contribute to life on Earth. We want to see all kinds of space activity move forward, but we want to see that done in a responsible and, obviously sustainable manner. And actually defining what that is and how to do it is harder. And so, my personal journey is to try to figure out, what can I do and what can my organization do to really push buttons and move things forward, and where can we be creative? And so a good example of that is back in, I can't believe this, 2019 now. I proposed internally to my organization that we hold an event. Not that the world needs more space events, but I was starting to get this feeling that space can be quite siloed. I'm sure you guys find this true in the marketing world too. Like, the people that do this talk over here, and the military people talk over here, and like the different people talk in their little silos. But when it actually comes to solving certain problems, I think we have to break through those silos. The academics need to talk to the politicians. Politicians need to talk to the industry people, and they need to talk to all of the industry people and not just the people who are knocking on their door asking for something. And so we put together this event, which is now just had its sixth one. This one was in Tokyo in July. It moves around every year, and the idea is that it evolves. Like, we don't make money off this event. It's not designed to produce revenue for my organization. It's designed because we sit at the nexus of a lot of these issues and can bring together all of those different people. And it was actually at that event back in 2022 in London where I did my first session on marketing, where we did a big panel where I got like marketing people and journalists and others to basically tell the whole room full of space people, hey, you're not doing a very good job. It was great. But it was a way of exploring these topics. And we really believe that if you can break through some of those silos, that you're going to make more progress than you will separately. Because it's really easy to identify a problem. It's a lot harder to actually find a solution and then make that happen. And so that's really kind of how we judge ourselves, is can we contribute to those things? What can we do? Can we identify points to that? And that's been a really exciting place. And I'm really privileged to work at a place where I can be creative and come up with new ideas and think about what can be most useful for the world. It's one of my favorite things about working at a nonprofit is that, I have that room for creativity to support things and come up with new products and new ideas. One of my colleagues a few years back, also in 2019, came up with this idea around counter space capabilities. So this is another topic that if you don't work on space sustainability, you might not think about it as really key, but the ability, there's all kinds of counter space capabilities, basically, anti-satellite weapons. But the kinetic ones, the ones where we actually shoot down and break up satellites, are the most concerning from a sustainability perspective. And my colleagues put together this amazing resource. If you're interested, it's out there. Where we went around and we said, well, people don't want to talk about this because it's tied to militaries and a lot of it's classified. But they said, but actually, we all know what the problem is. Like, the stuff that we need to talk about isn't classified. It's just there's this like overlap. So we have a document that's 900 pages long with over 1,000 citations of everything we can verify from public sources. So yeah, there's things that aren't in there. But we really tried hard to put together a resource that could serve as a basis for conversation. And so those are the kinds of things that, as an organization like mine, we're really excited to put out there in the world to basically help governments and companies have conversations about what a safe environment looks like. So those are just some examples of some of the things that I do, my colleagues do, that we think contribute to this larger conversation.
Well, one of the things I like about what you do is not only do you think about what needs to happen as a base and what the message would be for that, but you measure the success of it by action. It's one thing to have a good message. It's one thing for people to listen. It's another thing for people to take action based off of your words. And that's where you really are you're doing the right thing. You're ringing that bell.
Yeah, we absolutely try to do that. I mean, that's the real passion and the joy. But it's also, as we design events and we come back to this topic of marketing, it's something where I've really tried to showcase positive action and to showcase to the community that there are people working on all facets of these topics. And so it's been really interesting to get to know other parts of the space community as well. And, professionals like yourself who are working on this very specific piece of this, and so exciting to see change, and to be able to be a voice that, isn't hampered, I guess, is one of the things I really like. So for instance, I did a session on space marketing at a climate change conference in Oslo a few years ago. And we really got some speakers up there who were able to say, look, you guys' websites are terrible. Your press releases are not focused on the people they need to be focused on. And it was really gratifying to actually have companies come up to me afterwards and they're like, I have a meeting next week with my marketing person because, you're right. Like all we do is have pictures of satellites on our websites. And I'm like, that's great, but that's just a place to start. As you said earlier, right. This isn't just about sales, but if you even want to build up to sales, you have to first start with understanding. And a lot of times the people you're selling to, especially if you're trying to expand your market, they don't know that much about this, or they're busy and they need to understand it in things that are much more digestible to them. And I think we overlook how important it is if we're going to grow the value that we have so that we can grow our businesses, but also just have more benefit. We actually have to look at who we're trying to talk to and recognize that they don't know as much about this as we do, that it is going to be a slow learning curve, and what materials and what products and all these things can we put out there, all of us, that help that.
Well, I call it talking inside the bubble. A lot of the companies talk inside the bubble to each other. And yes, they know what's going on. They know the industry, but there's so many people outside the bubble that have no idea. And with commercial space going outside of the bubble, you've got companies like John Deere and Adidas and Estee Lauder that are getting into the space arena, but they aren't necessarily inside the bubble. So number one, there's opportunities outside the bubble. Number one. Number two, a lot of the companies inside the bubble don't even have marketing. A lot of them don't even have marketing people at all. So, let's get the marketing person in place and think of that as a valuable position, because a lot of companies just, the only person they had to woo was NASA for many years. Or maybe an investor. But even those are getting more and more competitive, and you need marketing. You need somebody that knows how to craft that message, resonate, and make the listeners take action. And when part of my message is that, and when you're doing this, a lot of the marketing that companies do have, they're only trying to get customers with it. Take a little slice, and maybe just twist one of your messages a little bit to be out in the public, because NASA's footprint is getting smaller and smaller. Their budgets are getting cut, but even if their budgets weren't cut, let's just say in a magical world their budget wasn't cut, their presence in the world is being minimized due to the explosion of space programs all over the world. We went from 2 countries, us and Russia, to 80 countries was the last figure I heard that had space programs. So the sheer mass of the industry is making that voice even smaller. So if we don't think of it as an important thing to do, we won't have a healthy space industry.
Yeah. I mean, it's that healthy part that worries me, because exactly. The marketing and these kind of support services are some of the last thing that space companies want to spend money on. And it worries me. There's always going to be retrenchment in the space industry, but I get worried that we build out really amazing technologies and then we do a poor job of selling them. And then these companies might go away, and then we lose these technologies. And then we're in this huge cycle where, that technology wasn't really viable. Well, was it? Or did we just do a poor job of selling it? I have a lot of questions about how we judge market, like business plans and market viability in the space industry. And that I think we overemphasize the technology and underemphasize everything else that makes the business successful. You can have a really great product and a really great idea, and you can still fail. And that is a fact.
Absolutely. They do all the time.
Yeah. And a lot of technical people don't want to face it. They're like, well, if your product's good, you're going to do fine. I'm like, no, that's not true. That's not true. Did you have good market timing? Did you talk to people? I would even say there's this middle ground between the public and NASA, but there's like all these communities out there who kind of know that space data is maybe a part of their world, or maybe they even use a little bit, but who aren't well educated. I mean, there's all these companies out there who really need to speak to their growing market. Who actually can use space data? Maybe they are, like you said, maybe they're John Deere and they already use a little bit, or they're integrating certain things into their technologies, but really trying to speak to that community of people who are looking to expand their businesses, but also understand that those people are busy. Those people are not out there looking to buy things, and you need to present them with packages that make sense and that they can ingest and sell internally. And then you can focus on selling them things. But if you don't give them the tools to make a case outside of the space industry, then you're cutting yourself off. And yes, it's a long tail. Those are not always going to be easy sales, but that's where we're going to grow. And so I think we have to come up with ways to do that effectively and efficiently. And this applies to small startups and it applies to large space companies as well. They're not always better at this. I've had conversations with some of the large EO providers who will tell me, yeah, we don't have time to focus on the long tail. We've got to focus on our primary clients. And I'm like, okay, but how are you going to get more clients? I guess I just don't understand that logic. Or, if you go onto the websites of some of these companies, clearly they think the only people who go on their website are people who already know all about them. And so it's data and statistics and pictures of satellites, and there's very little storytelling. There's very little contextualizing on why this matters. Or even if you want to get more specific, very little in the middle where you talk about, well, if you work in this industry, this is how a company's products apply to you. And here's who you call to utilize this data. It's just not there. It actually surprised me because it's not just small startups with no budgets that have this problem. It's all of these companies, or it's a lot of them. And we really have to get better at it, or we're going to start to see more and more companies fail. And I personally don't want to see that.
Yeah, there's a lot of great products that never make it. When I started my career, I was in an environmental technology incubator, and I saw life-saving technology for the planet die because people thought that if you have a cure for cancer, they're obviously going to find you. No, they're not. They are totally not going to find you unless you tell them you exist. And tell them why they should care that you exist.
Yep. Yeah,
so
exactly.
We've talked a lot about what companies can do. Care about your message a little bit, care about the space industry more, and care about the public a little bit more. And you can see massive changes if we all do just a little bit. It doesn't have to be just all NASA. It doesn't have to be all one entity. It can be just a little bit of all of us. Be creative with your marketing person's time and see where you can just expand the story just a little bit. So are there any last words or final thought you want to leave our audience with today as we start to go through our day and maybe a challenge on what they should do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to assume that a lot of people listen to your podcast are the marketing professionals in the space industry. But even if they're not, this applies, which is one of the things I used to do at NASA was help the scientists talk to other people, right? They would write these very scientific-y things. And then I would look at it and be like, well, what do you really mean here? Or can we define what that is? Or how do we tell this to an OMB auditor? So, I had a lot of work early in my career with translating science speak to words that other people understand. And I would encourage everyone who listens to this to really take ownership of that. Because I agree with you. If we all did a little, we'd see a lot of result. But first, it comes from framing and not assuming everybody finds what we do cool. So start from a place of the people I'm talking to are not enthralled as I am with satellites and astronauts and all these things. And then figure out what that means for your company or your organization. And if you're the communications person, if you're the marketing person, do not be afraid to tell the scientists and the CEOs and all these other people, you're not doing this right. They're really smart people. They know what they do and they do it really well. But one of those things is typically not communicate. Again, I've met a lot of aerospace engineers in my life, and a lot of them, if you make a joke about a rocket scientist, don't even know why that's funny. So let's not start from a place that everybody is a good communicator, and that's okay. We all have different skill sets. And so my challenge would be, if you are someone who knows how to communicate, or if you're someone who's in a position to make this change, to really challenge yourself to think about who are all of my communities. If I came to my own website, or if I came to my own presentation. And this should be all of your communications. It should be anytime anybody speaks. It should be what you put out on social media. It should be all of these places. Really look at it with a challenging eye and try to ask yourself, can we do better? And who are we trying to talk to here? And is this an effective way to do that? And don't be afraid to work with others who those aren't their skill sets to help them get better, or at least help them improve. Because that's, I think, where we're going to make, if we bring in these other skill sets more and more and more to the space industry, we're all going to get better. And that's a responsibility that we all have. And so my challenge to everybody would be, don't take this lying down, and understand that it is something that you can improve piecemeal, but you can also improve wholesale. It's a whole conversation. But at first, you have to really understand that marketing, is not just about sales, but it will improve your sales. But it is about the viability of our whole industry. And so really coming at it with that critical eye, with an understanding that if what you put out there can only be understood by 10 people in your company, that's a place to start. And to really seek to improve that. There's nothing wrong with aesthetics. There's nothing wrong with figuring these things out. I think sometimes in the science community, we can be quite disdainful sometimes of these kinds of skills and things, but we shouldn't be. Everybody has different things to bring to making this all successful. And if we're going to do that, that means us all being, wow, let me look at this and figure out, like, if my child looks at this, what are they going to come away from this? If my grandma looks at this, what are they going to come away with? If my congressman looks at this, what is he going to come away with? And you can't win. You can't speak to every audience all the time. But if you put yourself in that audience mindset, it's much easier to figure out where you can make changes and tweaks and still present what you need to present. Like we provide, high resolution, blah, 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 blah. All really important, but it's not important if you never get their attention. If you aren't actually got people paying attention, it doesn't matter how good what you're doing is or how interesting it is. So you have to start from a place of, who am I talking to, and have I told it in a way that they can engage with me? So that would be my challenge to everyone, is don't be afraid to speak up. This is really an issue. It's great to see people like you, Izzy, working on it full time. I wish I could. I do think it's really fun. We try to do our little piece at Secure World, but we all should consider ourselves empowered to improve this, because if we don't, we will see cut budgets. We will see loss of resources. We won't see an expansion of our industries. And so to me, it's relevant to everybody.
And like we started off this conversation, we are all in the marketing business.
Yep.
So whether or not you focus on that or not, we are in marketing. So, and we need to market space.
Absolutely.
A special thanks to Krystal Azelton, Senior Director of Program Planning at the Secure World Foundation, for sharing her journey to space. Information about today's episode can be found in the show notes on spacemarketingpodcast.com. Please like and subscribe to the Space Marketing Podcast to help us get the word out about this incredible industry of space. I hope that you have found this podcast useful for your journey as you reach for those stars.